We are live. Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing? I just got a message from YouTube saying that I'm live, so I can verify that. All right, who's in the chat so far? We have 9 people here. Let us know where you are living if you want to. We have Magdalena. Hello, everyone. Tamar. Hello. Hapchong. And Adam, of course. So welcome to the live stream. This is part 2. This is part 2, right? Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, part 2 listening party. The reason why I say part 2 is it's actually literally part 2. At least that's what it says in the audiobook here. So we got, I think we went through like 50, almost 53 minutes last time, even though it was almost a 2-hour stream. So I guess I did a lot of talking. Let's see who else. We have Tommy. Hey, Tommy. Good to see you. Well, the other Tommy. Hey, Tommy. Trish is here. Good to see you, Trish. How's everyone doing? So I think we'll take the same approach that we did last time. If you weren't there last time, we're just going to listen to this audiobook, part 2 of Zen Mind's Beginner Mind, and just listen to the teachings. You guys can make comments if you want. If there's any questions, we can put it in there. Clarify anything if it needs to be. So far, it sounded pretty clear and simple, which I like. Hey, Edith is here, listening from Maine. Hey, Edith. Trish, I'm doing okay so far. The kids are at grandma's house, so I think we stayed up late watching movies and sleeping in. Tobias is here. Good evening. That's right, it's evening. So I'm doing a different time. I think last time I streamed this at 10 a.m. Pacific time. But I didn't want to conflict with the Empty Gate Zen Center practice. So that's why I changed it to 11:30. I didn't want it to go too late because I know some of you in Europe, it's a little late. Joe. Hey, Joe. Good to see you again. Helena from South Africa. Hello. Good to see you all. Should we begin? Trixie Cat. She knows, Joe. All right. So let's begin. We got to get through this. I don't know how long this part is, so we'll just kind of improvise as we go. I may say some words during this as it's playing. I might stop sometimes just to see if there's any interesting points that Suzuki Roshi has to say. Sound good? Let's go. And let me know if you can hear it. I turned it all the way up. That's what I did last time.
That is to say, your own true nature resumes itself. Part 2.
All right.
Right attitude.
Right attitude.
Single-minded way. The purpose of my talk is not to give you some intellectual understanding, but just to express my appreciation of our Zen practice.
Wow. Didn't I just make a video about this on Friday? Really good point.
To be able to sit with you in Zazen is very, very unusual. Of course, whatever we do is unusual because our life itself is so unusual. Buddha said, to appreciate your human life is as rare as soil on your fingernail. You know, dirt hardly ever sticks on your nail. Our human life is rare and wonderful. When I sit, I want to remain sitting forever. But I encourage myself to have another practice. For instance, to recite the sutra or to bow.
Hey, John.
And when I bow, I think, this is wonderful. But I have to change my practice again to recite the sutra. So the purpose of my talk is to express my appreciation. That is all. Our way is not...
Yeah, I think in the video on Friday, I was hoping that the videos and the live streams, all that stuff can help encourage us to practice. But I do appreciate it too.
To sit to acquire something. It is to express our true nature. That is our practice.
Oops.
If you want to express yourself, your true nature, there should be some natural and appropriate way of expression. Even swaying right and left as you sit down or get up from Zazen is an expression of yourself. It is not preparation for practice or relaxation after practice. It is part of the practice. So we should not do it as if it were preparing for something else. This should be true in your everyday life. To cook or to fix some food is not preparation. According to Dogen, it is practice. To cook is not just to prepare food for someone or for yourself. It is to express your sincerity. So when you cook, you should express yourself in your activity in the kitchen. You should allow yourself plenty of time. You should work on it with nothing in your mind and without expecting anything. You should just cook.
Yeah, my kids would disagree with that. They expect something out of my cooking. But I liked his teaching point about not making a practice and life a separate thing. I hear this all the time. It's like I have my practice and then I have my everyday life. How is that separate? And where's the boundary that makes that separate? Right? Where does everyday life start? Does it start off the cushion or off or out of the room that you practice sitting meditation in? Is it out of the house? Like, where does it start, right? So his point too is the same as like sitting Zen, cooking Zen are exactly the same. We're becoming the cooking or becoming the sitting in that moment. Silviu, hey, how's it going? Multitasking, as usual.
That is also an expression of our sincerity, a part of our practice. It is necessary to sit in Zazen in this way, but sitting is not our only way. Whatever you do, it should be an expression of the same deep activity. We should appreciate what we are doing. There is no preparation for something else. The Bodhisattva's way is called the single-minded way, or one railway track thousands of miles long. The railway track is always the same. If it were to become wider or narrower, it would be disastrous. Wherever you go, the railway track is always the same. That is the Bodhisattva's way. So even if the sun were to rise from the west, the Bodhisattva has only one way. His way is in each moment to express his nature and his sincerity. We say railway track, but actually there's no such thing. Sincerity itself is the railway track. The sights we see from the train will change, but we're always running on the same track, and there's no beginning or end to the track. Beginningless and endless track. There's no starting point, nor goal, nothing to attain. Just to run on the track is our way.
Good teaching. In the school I teach in, we would say, when you're doing something, just do it 100%. And if we're doing something right now in this moment, which we are, right? I'm talking and you're listening. Hey. Oh, Helena. Okay. Bad connection. You're back. Good. So when you're doing something, do it 100%. And when we're doing that, like you said, the track doesn't have a beginning or end. That means we also don't have a beginning or end. We don't have a past or future or even a present, right? Because when we're doing something 100%, those things doesn't exist. Trish, practicing during everyday situations helps us more easily become present during unexpected or stressful events. Yeah. And the only time we can do that is right this moment.
This is the nature of our Zen practice. But when you become curious about the railway track, danger is there. You should not see the railway track. If you look at the track, you'll become dizzy. Just appreciate the sights you see from the train. That's our way. There is no need for the passengers to be curious about the track. Someone will take care of it. Buddha will take care of it. But sometimes we try to explain the railway track because we become curious if something is always the same. We wonder, how is it possible for the Bodhisattva always to be the same? What is his secret? But there is no secret. Everyone has the same nature as the railway track. There were two good friends, Chokai and Hofuku. They were talking about the Bodhisattva's way, and Chokai said, even if the Arhat, an enlightened one, were to have evil desires, Still, the Tathagata Buddha does not have two kinds of words. I say that the Tathagata has words, but no dualistic words. Hofuku said, even though you say so, your comment is not perfect. Choke asked, what is your understanding of the Tathagata's words? Hofuku said, we have had enough discussion, so let's have a cup of tea. Hofuku did not give his friend an answer because it is impossible to give a verbal interpretation of our way. Nevertheless, as a part of their practice, these two good friends discussed the Bodhisattva's way, even though they did not expect to find a new...
We have a lot of koans with Zen Master Joju in him. Some of you are familiar with Zen Master Joju. But he always used to say that too. Someone would say, you know, how can I understand my true self or understand the way? He would say, go drink tea. It's a very famous Zen saying.
Interpretation. So Hofuku answered, our discussion is over. Let's have a cup of tea. That's a very good answer, isn't it? It's the same for my talk. When my talk is over, your listening is over. There's no need to remember what I say. There's no need to understand what I say. You understand. You have full understanding within yourself. There is no problem. Repetition.
Right. We already have this original enlightened nature. So these talks, these words are pointing to that. They're not the words themselves. Hey, Raul's here. Hey, Raul, how you doing?
The Indian thought and practice encountered by Buddha was based on an idea of human beings as a combination of spiritual and physical elements. They thought that the physical side of man bound the spiritual side, and so their religious practice was aimed at making the physical element weaker in order to free and strengthen the spirit. Thus, the practice Buddha found in India emphasized asceticism. But Buddha found when he practiced asceticism that there was no limit to the attempt to purge ourselves physically, and that it made religious practice very idealistic. This kind of war with our body can only end when we die. But according to this Indian thought, we will return in another life and another life to repeat the struggle over and over again without ever attaining perfect enlightenment. And even if you think you can make your physical strength weak enough to free your spiritual power, it will only work as long as you continue your ascetic practice. If you resume your everyday life, you'll have to strengthen your body, but then you'll have to weaken it again to regain your spiritual power. And then you'll have to repeat this process over and over again. This may be too great a simplification of the Indian practice encountered by Buddha, and we may laugh at it. But actually, some people continue this practice even today. Sometimes without realizing it, this idea of asceticism is in the back of their minds. But practicing in this way will not result in any progress. Buddha's way was quite different. At first, he studied the Hindu practice of his time and area, and he practiced asceticism. But Buddha was not interested in the elements comprising human beings, nor in metaphysical theories of existence. He was more concerned about how he himself existed in this moment. That was his point. Bread is made from flour. How flour becomes bread when put in the oven was for Buddha the most important thing. How we become enlightened was his main interest. The enlightened person is some perfect, desirable character for himself and for others. Buddha wanted to find out how human beings develop this ideal character, how various sages in the past became sages. In order to find out how dough became perfect bread, he made it over and over again until he became quite successful. That was his practice. But we may find it not so interesting to cook the same thing over and over again every day. It is rather tedious, you may say. If you lose the spirit of repetition, it will become quite difficult. But it will not be difficult if you are full of strength and vitality. Anyway, we cannot keep still. We have to do something. So if you do something, you should be very observant and careful and alert. Our way is to put the dough in the oven and watch it carefully. Once you know how the dough becomes bread, you will understand enlightenment. So how this physical body becomes a sage is our main interest. We are not so concerned about what flour is, or what dough is, or what a sage is. A sage is a sage. Metaphysical explanations of human nature are not the point. So the kind of practice we stress thus cannot become too idealistic. If an artist becomes too idealistic, he will commit suicide because between his ideal and his actual ability, there is a great gap. Because there is no bridge long enough to go across the gap, he will begin to despair. That is the usual spiritual way. But our spiritual way is not so idealistic. In some sense, we should be idealistic. At least we should be interested in making bread which tastes and looks good. Actual practice is repeating over and over again until you find out how to become bread. There is no secret in our way. Just to practice Zazen and put ourselves into the oven is our way.
Be careful. But it's interesting too, like part of practice too, right? We start to see this chain of cause and effect. Usually we only experience the result of something. I talk about this in my book, right? We think we are this person or character, and that leads us to our fate or destiny, or that we can say that's our karma. But if we pay attention to our thoughts, pay attention to our words, pay attention to our actions, pay attention to our habits, then we get to see this very clearly. So in Zen, we're always saying just perceive, right? So let's take away actions or habits, actions, words, thoughts. Take away all of that. Then what's left?
Zen and excitement. My master died when I was 31.
Wow.
Although I wanted to devote myself just to Zen practice at a Heiji monastery, I had to succeed my master at his temple.
Ooh.
I became quite busy, and being so young, I had many difficulties. These difficulties gave me some experience, but it meant nothing compared with the true, calm, serene way of life. It is necessary for us to keep the constant way. Zen is not some kind of excitement, but concentration on our usual everyday routine. If you become too busy and too excited, your mind becomes rough and ragged. This is not good. If possible, try to be always calm and joyful and keep yourself from excitement. Usually, we become busier and busier, day by day.
This kind of means too, if we're wanting a certain experience out of Zen practice, then we're going to be dissatisfied, right? Because we either don't get it, or we get a certain state, but we can't keep it, or we wish it was different, or we want more.
Year by year, especially in our modern world. If we revisit old, familiar places after a long time, we are astonished by the changes. It cannot be helped. But if we become interested in some excitement or in our own change, we will become completely involved in our busy life and we will be lost. But if your mind is calm and constant, you can keep yourself away from the noisy world, even though you are in the midst of it. In the midst of noise and change, your mind will be quiet and stable.
I talk about this point too. Another way of saying this is too is I always give an example of a dog barking, right? Because we think a dog barking's loud and it's ruining my meditation. But if our mind is clear, I know he would say calm. I use the word clear. If your mind is clear, then you don't hear the dog barking. You are the dog barking, right? There's no separation. Sound of the bird is only it.
Zen is not something to get excited about. Some people start to practice Zen just out of curiosity, and they only make themselves busier.
I was very excited when I first started practicing Zen, but as you know, as with anything, right, you get to start to see the reality of your own mind, and a lot of the times it's not so pleasant.
If your practice makes you worse, it is ridiculous. I think that if you try to do Zazen once a week, that will make you busy enough. Do not be too interested in Zen. When young people get excited about Zen, they often give up schooling and go to some mountain or forest in order to sit. That kind of interest is not true interest. Just continue in your calm, ordinary practice, and your character will be built up. If your mind is always busy, there will be no time to build, and you will not be successful, particularly if you work too hard on it. Building character is like making bread. You have to mix it, little by little, step by step, and moderate temperature is needed. You know yourself quite well, and you know how much temperature you need. You know exactly what you need. But if you get too excited, you will forget how much temperature is good for you, and you will lose your own way. This is very dangerous. Buddha said the same thing about the good ox driver. The driver knows how much load the ox can carry.
You're late.
And he keeps the ox from being overloaded. You know your way and your state of mind. Do not carry too much. Buddha also said that building character is like building a dam.
Cesar, you say lost the first segment? What segment?
You should be very careful in making the bank. If you try to do it all at once, water will leak from it. Make the bank carefully, and you'll end up with a fine dam for the reservoir. Our unexciting way of practice may appear to be very negative. This is not so. It is a wise and effective way to work on ourselves. It is just very plain. I find this point very difficult for people, especially young people, to understand. On the other hand, it may seem as if I am speaking about gradual attainment. This is not so either.
Your mind's clear, Cesare.
In fact, this is the sudden way, because when your practice is calm and ordinary, everyday life itself is enlightenment. Right effort.
Right effort, okay.
The most important point in our practice is to have right or perfect effort. Right effort,
sounds like he's going through the Eightfold Path here.
Directed in the right direction is necessary. If your effort is headed in the wrong direction, especially if you're not aware of this, it is diluted effort. Our effort in our practice should be directed from achievement to non-achievement. Usually when you do something, you want to achieve something. You attach to some result.
Yeah.
From achievement to non-achievement means to be rid of the unnecessary and bad results of effort. If you do something in the spirit of non-achievement, there's a good quality in it. So just to do something without any particular effort is enough. When you make some special effort to achieve something, some excessive quality, some extra element is involved in it. You should get rid of excessive things. If your practice is good, without being aware of it, you will become proud of your practice. That pride is extra.
Again, he's talking about this gaining idea. And actually, I have to be honest, a lot of us get into practice because we want something out of it, right? I wanted to get rid of my anger and confusion. But I guess what we find, what's interesting, is a teacher told me when I first started practicing, well, probably within the first year, so when you practice Zen, you don't get anything. And it really bothered me. What do you mean we don't get anything? But just like the Buddha said, we already have it. So it's not like we're practicing to get something. We're practicing to see our own nature clearly.
What you do is good, but something more is added to it. So you should get rid of that something which is extra. This point is very, very important, but usually we are not subtle enough to realize it, and we go in the wrong direction. Because all of us are doing the same thing and making the same mistake, we do not realize it. So without realizing it, we are making many mistakes, and we create problems among us. This kind of bad effort is called being Dharma-ridden or practice-ridden. You are involved in some idea of practice or attainment, and you cannot get out of it.
Amen to that.
When you are involved in some dualistic idea, it means your practice is not pure. By purity, we do not mean to polish something, trying to make some impure thing pure. By purity, we just mean things as they are.
Yeah.
When something is added, that is impure. When something becomes dualistic, that is not pure.
So the way I would teach that point often is we say, don't add on to the truth, right? So we perceive the truth as it is. So let's go back to the example of the dog barking. Dog barking is just woof woof, but we add on to it. We make something. We make it loud, we make it good, we make it bad. And that's what creates so much dissatisfaction in our lives, but also others as well.
If you think you will get something from practicing Zazen, already you are involved in impure practice. It is all right to say there is practice and there is enlightenment, but we should not be caught by the statement. You should not be tainted by it. When you practice Zazen, just practice Zazen. If enlightenment comes, it just comes. We should not attach to the attainment. The true quality of Zazen is always there, even if you're not aware of it. So forget all about what you think you may have gained from it. Just do it.
Just do it. There
The
you
quality of Zazen will express itself, and you will have it. People ask what it means to practice Zazen with no gaining idea. What kind of effort is necessary for that kind of practice? The answer is effort to get rid of something extra from our practice. If some extra idea comes, you should try to stop it. You should remain in pure practice. That's the point toward which our effort is directed. We say, to hear the sound of one hand clapping. Usually the sound of clapping is made with two hands, and we think that clapping with one hand makes no sound at all. But actually, one hand is sound. Even though you do not hear it, there is sound. If you clap with two hands, you can hear the sound. But if sound did not already exist before you clapped, you could not make the sound.
The famous koan in the Japanese tradition. What is the sound of one hand clapping? I have a very interesting response to this. I'd be curious to see what you think, what your idea is.
Before you make it, there is sound. Because there is sound, you can make it, and you can hear it. Sound is everywhere. If you just practice it, there is sound. Do not try to listen to it. If you do not listen to it, the sound is all over. Because you try to hear it, sometimes there is sound and sometimes there is no sound. Do you understand? Even though you do not do anything, you have the quality of Zazen always. But if you try to find it, if you try to see the quality, you have no quality. You are living in this world as one individual. But before you take the form of a human being, you are already there, always there. We are always here. Do you understand? You think before you were born, you were not here. But how is it possible for you to appear in this world when there is no you? Because you are already there, you can appear in the world. Also, it is not possible for something to vanish which does not exist. Because something is there, something can vanish.
Shiba, hello, welcome.
You may think that when you die, you disappear. You no longer exist. But even though you vanish, something which is existent cannot be non-existent.
Yeah, so
that is the magic.
Some of you are familiar with this Zen poem called The Human Root, and it talks about life and death, right? That life is like a cloud that appears, death is like a cloud that disappears. But originally, this floating cloud does not exist. Life, death, coming and going are also like that. But there is one thing that's pure and clear, not depending on life and death. It's not depending on coming and going. So what is this one pure and clear thing? This is his point here.
We ourselves cannot put any magic spells on this world. The world is its own magic. If we are looking at something, it can vanish from our sight. But if we do not try to see it, that something cannot vanish. Because you were watching it, it can disappear. But if no one is watching, how is it possible for anything to disappear? If someone is watching you, you can escape from him. But if no one is watching, you cannot escape from yourself. So try not to see something in particular. Try not to achieve anything special. You already have everything in your own pure quality.
Right. We have this teaching too. It's interesting. Is like right now, can you see your eyes? No, you can't see your own eyes, but you can use your eyes to see. So it's like your mind trying to understand the mind is not the correct direction. How does this mind and what's in front of us connect?
If you understand this ultimate fact, there is no fear. There may be some difficulty, of course, but there is no fear. If people have difficulty without being aware of the difficulty, that is true difficulty. They may appear very confident. They may think they are making a big effort in the right direction, but without knowing it, what they do comes out of fear. Something may vanish for them.
Right.
But if your effort is in the right direction, then there's no fear of losing anything. Even if it is in the wrong direction, if you are aware of that, you will not be deluded.
So, John, yeah, the same sound as a tree falling in the forest. Right. It's a kind of I guess a riddle that we used to hear when we were kids, right? If the tree falls in the forest and no one's around, does it make a sound? There's actually I use that sometimes as a koan. So there is a response to that. It's just not what we think.
There's nothing to lose. There is only the constant, pure quality of right practice. No trace.
Sometimes right effort, right
When
concentration could be looked at as correct practice, correct, but not as a good and bad, because right, it sounds like it's like a opposites thing, a right and a wrong, but just more natural. Like we have this original natural nature, right? That's why, again, we're not practicing to get it, we're practicing to see it.
Mind is calm and quite simple. But usually our mind is very busy and complicated, and it is difficult to be concentrated on what we are doing. This is because before we act, we think, and this thinking leaves some trace. Our activity is shadowed by some preconceived idea.
Yes, sometimes a Zen
idea. The thinking not only leaves some trace or shadow, but also gives us many other notions about other activities and things. These traces and notions make our minds very complicated.
Yes.
When we do something with a quite simple, clear mind, we have no notion or shadows, and our activity is strong and straightforward.
Hey, I thought practice ended at 11:30, Tom. What are you guys doing?
But when we do something with a complicated mind, in relation to other things or people or society, our activity becomes very complex.
Welcome, by the way, Tom.
Most people have a double or triple notion in one activity. There is a saying, to catch two birds with one stone. That is what people usually try to do. Because they want to catch too many birds, they find it difficult to be concentrated on one activity, and they may end up not catching any birds at all. That kind of thinking always leaves its shadow on their activity.
Right.
The shadow is not actually the thinking itself. Of course, it is often necessary to think or prepare before we act, but right thinking does not leave any shadow. Thinking which leaves traces comes out of your relative confused mind. Relative mind is the mind which sets itself in relation to other things, thus limiting itself. It is this small mind which creates gaining ideas and leaves traces of itself.
I got it, Tom.
If you leave a trace of your thinking on your activity, you will be attached to the trace. For instance, you may say, "This is what I have done." But actually, It is not so. In your recollection, you may say, I did such and such a thing in some certain way. But actually, that is never exactly what happened. When you think in this way, you limit the actual experience of what you have done. So if you attach to the idea of what you have done, you are involved in selfish ideas.
Yes.
Often we think what we have done is good, but it may not actually be so. When we become old, we are very often proud of what we have done. When others listen to someone proudly telling something which he has done, they will feel funny because they know his recollection is one-sided. They know that what he has told them is not exactly what he did.
I have to say, in my experience, this is true. Like, just looking at the kind of big changes that happened during earlier in my life, is like I have my story about what happened, but I don't even know if that's what happened. Right? I remember when I was going through my divorce in early 20s, right? I had my story and she had her story. I was wondering, gosh, why does it seem so different? Right? So it's really interesting that he talks about the shadow. So if we live our life with the strong concept of I, and we don't understand this I, right? It creates a lot of confusion. It creates shadows, which influences our actions and speech.
Moreover, if he is proud of what he did, that pride will create some problem for him.
Right.
Repeating his recollections in this way, his personality will be twisted more and more until he becomes quite a disagreeable, stubborn fellow. This is an example of leaving a trace of one's thinking. We should not forget what we did, but it should be without an extra trace. To leave a trace is not the same as to remember something.
Good point.
It is necessary to remember what we have done, but we should not become attached to what we have done in some special sense. What we call attachment is just these traces of our thought and activity.
Right.
In order not to leave any traces, when you do something, you should do it with your whole body and mind.
So again, we say when you do something, do it 100%. Then after you're done with that, then do this moment 100%. That's why I'm always saying, what am I doing now and how can I help, right? That happens only in this moment.
You should be concentrated on what you do. You should do it completely, like a good bonfire. You should not be a smoky fire. You should burn yourself completely.
It's got a lot of analogies.
If you do not burn yourself completely, a trace of yourself will be left in what you do. You will have something remaining which is not completely burned out. Zen activity is activity which is completely burned out, with nothing remaining but ashes. This is the goal of our practice. That is what...
That's a good mind, Cesare. You said I'm experiencing something like that these days. I have my version, but I wonder what others' version is too. To find common ground. That's what really helps us understand other people. It's like we start to see, I just have my idea and my opinions about something, but I don't know if it's the truth. That's really a part of letting go. But if we really have fear, and that fear comes from not understanding ourselves, then we have to hold on to that because that's us and I'm correct. So this is a really interesting mind. It's like just to see our opinions are what they are. Like I said, it doesn't mean you don't have them. It just means we are not attached to them. I understand it's just my opinion or my view. It doesn't make it correct or good or bad, right or wrong. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Dogen meant when he said, ashes do not come back to firewood.
Good point.
Ash is ash. Ash should be completely ash. The firewood should be firewood. When this kind of activity takes place, one activity covers everything. So our practice is not a matter of 1 hour or 2 hours or 1 day or 1 year. If you practice Zazen with your whole body and mind, even for a moment, that is Zazen. So moment after moment, you should devote yourself to your practice. You should not have any...
Right. It's all opinions and views. So I say this quite often. Our There's the attachment to views. There's no view. And then there's using this view, right? So how do we use it? But we usually can't. That means, how do we use our thinking, or how do we use our understanding in a way that actually helps people? Usually we're just arguing about it. I think, yeah, I talk about this in my last video.
Any remains after you do something. But this does not mean to forget all about it. If you understand this point, all the dualistic thinking and all the problems of life will vanish. When you practice Zen, you become one with Zen. There is no you and no Zazen.
Good.
When you bow, there is no Buddha and no you. One complete bowing takes place. That is all. This is nirvana. When Buddha transmitted our practice to Mahakashyapa, he just picked up a flower with a smile. Only Mahakashyapa understood what he meant. No one else.
I'm sure you all heard the story before, right? The story he's talking about, which, by the way, after doing my research, may not be real, like a lot of these stories. But there was a time when a bunch of monastics went to Buddhist teaching, that the Buddha just sat there in silence and didn't say anything. So people were starting to wonder what was going on with him. Like, is he feeling okay? Is this some special teaching, right? They were a little bit confused by the silence. And then moments later, he picked up this flower and held it up to the assembly. And at that moment, Mahakashyapa smiled. So Buddha knew that Mahakashyapa understood this teaching. Whereas other people were, what does that mean? This must be some secret meaning behind that. So we actually asked this in as a koan. First of all, is what is the meaning of the Buddha picking up the flower? What is the meaning of Mahakashyapa smiling? That's really important. So this means that Mahakashyapa, as you tell them, they're getting in there. So Mahakashyapa's mind and Buddha's mind, we're not separate. We call that a transmission, actually, that the teacher's understanding, the student's understanding connects, which is actually before understanding, right? Thank you, Tom.
Understood. We do not know if this is a historical event or not, but it means something.
He admits it too.
It is a demonstration of our traditional way. Some activity which covers everything is true activity. And the secret of this activity is transmitted from Buddha to us. This is Zen practice, not some teaching taught by Buddha or some rules of life set up by him. The teaching or the rules should be changed according to the place or according to the people who observe them.
Really important.
But the secret of this practice cannot be changed. It is always true.
What is the secret of our practice?
So for us, there is no other way to live in this world. I think this is quite true. And this is easy to accept, easy to understand, and easy to practice. If you compare the kind of life based on this practice with what is happening in this world or in human society, you will find out just how valuable the truth Buddha left us is. It is quite simple, and practice is quite simple. But even so, we should not ignore it. Its great value must be discovered. Usually when it is so simple, we say, oh, I know that. It is quite simple. Everyone knows that. But if we do not find its value, it means nothing. It is the same as not knowing. The more you understand culture, the more you will understand how true and how necessary this teaching is. Instead of only criticizing your culture.
I think that's important too. What does he mean by teaching? Again, he's not talking about Buddhism. He's talking about something that's before Buddhism. That teaching, which can appear in any actually practice in any religion, any moment.
You should devote your mind and body to practicing this simple way. Then society and culture will grow out of you. It may be all right for the people who are too attached to their culture to be critical. Their critical attitude means they are coming back to the simple truth left by Buddha. But our approach is just to be concentrated on a simple, basic practice and a simple, basic understanding of life. There should be no traces in our activity. We should not attach to some fancy ideas or to some beautiful things. We should not seek for something good. The truth is always near at hand, within your reach. God-giving.
Wow, God-giving.
Every existence in nature, every existence in the human world, every cultural work that we create is something which was given or is being given to us, relatively speaking. But as everything is originally one, we are in actuality giving out everything. Moment after moment, we are creating something, and this is the joy of our life. But this I, which is creating and always giving out something, is not the small I, it is the big I. Even though you do not realize the oneness of this big I with everything, when you give something, you feel good. Because at that time, you feel at one with what you are giving. This is why it feels better to give than to take.
I don't know. Feels good. Feels natural, though, too. I remember Zen Master Kobang, which is Zen Master Sung Song's teacher, would often say, when you are giving, forget about three things. I, you, and give. And right, what that means is we're moving with the situation as it's appearing. So if you connect with somebody or a situation and you do something to help or you're giving, there's no I, you, or give. It's just directly the act of doing it. Another name for that is big mind. Zen Master Sung Song uses this phrase as well.
We have a saying, Danya Prajna Paramita. Danya means to give. Prajna is wisdom, and Paramita means to cross over or to reach the other shore. Our life can be seen as a crossing of a river. The goal of our life's effort is to reach the other shore, nirvana. Prajna Paramita, the true wisdom of life, is that in each step of the way, the other shore is actually reached. To reach the other shore with each step of the crossing is the way of true living. Danya Prajna Paramita is the first of the 6 ways of true living. The second is Sila Prajna Paramita, or the Buddhist precepts. Then there are Kshanti Prajna Paramita, or endurance, Virya Prajna Paramita, or ardor and constant effort, Dhyana Prajna Paramita, or Zen practice, and Prajna Paramita, or wisdom. Actually, these 6 Prajna Paramita are one, but as we can observe life from various sides, we count 6. Dogen Zenji said, to give is non-attachment. That is, just not to attach to anything is to give. It does not matter what is given. To give a penny or a piece of leaf is Danya Prajna Paramita. To give one line or even one word of teaching is Danya Prajna Paramita. If given in the spirit of non-attachment, the material offering and the teaching offering have the same value. With the right spirit, all that we do, all that we create, is Danya Prajna Paramita. So Dogen said, to produce something, to participate in human activity, is also Danya Prajna Paramita. To provide a ferry boat for people, or to make a bridge for people, is Danya Prajna Paramita. Actually, to give one line of the teaching may be to make a ferry boat for someone. According to Christianity, every existence in nature is something which was created for or given to us by God. That is the perfect idea of giving. But if you think that God created man and that you are somehow separate from God, you are liable to think you have the ability to create something separate, something not given by him. For instance, we create airplanes and highways. And when we repeat, I create, I create, I create, soon we forget who is actually the I which creates the various things. We soon forget about God.
Right. There's a good teaching in Christianity, actually, I heard from Father Kevin Hunt about be still and know that I'm God. Or the kingdom of God is within you, right? So sometimes in Buddhism, we say that your Buddha nature and yourself are not separate, but that just means God and yourself is not separate. Just another word, another way of saying it. Interesting.
Is the danger of human culture. Actually, to create with the big I is to give. We cannot create and own what we create for ourselves since everything was created by God. This point should not be forgotten. But because we do forget who is doing the creating and the reason for the creation, we become attached to the material or exchange value. This has no value in comparison to the absolute value of something as God's creation. Even though something has no material or relative value to any small I, it has absolute value in itself.
If you're just joining us, let us know in the chat where you are living. Thank you for coming. It's good to see everybody.
Not to be attached to something is to be aware of its absolute value. Everything you do should be based on such an awareness and not on material or self-centered ideas of value. Then whatever you do is true giving, is Danya Prajna Paramita. When we sit in the cross-legged posture, we resume our fundamental activity of creation. There are perhaps three kinds of creation. The first is to be aware of ourselves after we finish Zazen. When we sit, we are nothing.
Good to see you, Adam.
We don't even realize what we are. We just sit.
Michigan.
But when we stand up, we are there. That is the first step in creation. When you are there, everything else is there. Everything is created all at once.
Wow, good to see you. Good harbor.
When we emerge from nothing, when everything emerges from nothing, we see it all as fresh, new creation. This is non-attachment.
Wild, right?
The second kind of creation is when you act or produce or prepare something like food or tea. The third kind is to create something within yourself, such as education or culture or art or some system for our society.
Phineas.
So there are three kinds of creation.
From Scotland.
But if you forget the
Welcome.
first, the most important one,
I thought so. Okay.
the other two will be like children who have lost their parents. Their creation will mean nothing. Usually everyone forgets about Zazen. Everyone forgets about God.
Just have a question for those. I haven't read this book, but for those who've read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, is it different when you hear it? Like, is it being presented in a different way? I'm just curious about that. Let me know in the chat.
God. They work very hard at the second and third kinds of creation, but God does not help the activity. How is it possible for him to help when he does not realize who he is? That is why we have so many problems in this world.
Yes.
When we forget the fundamental source of our creating, we are like children who do not know what to do when they lose their parents.
Wow.
If you understand Danya Prajna Paramita, you will understand how it is we create so many problems for ourselves. Of course, to live is to create problems. If we did not appear in this world, our parents would
How's
have
it different,
no
Tom?
difficulty with us. Just by appearing, we create problems for them.
Don't remember
This is
that.
all right. Everything creates some problems. But usually people think that when they die, everything is over. The problems disappear. But your death may create problems too. Actually,
wow.
our problem should be so.
You know, that's a whole other point, Cesare, is that you read it in Italian, right? Yeah, I've heard people who speak different languages. Like, it's really interesting to see. They could start to see like the words are not it, right? They're just words pointing to something. Sheeta, yes, it's different. I believe These were originally spoken lectures. Yeah. Some of the great books out there, like I think some of Zen Master Sung Song's books, this book, Zen Minded Beginner's Mind, were from lectures. That's like Zen Master Sung Song never wrote a book. He gave many talks, and Hyang Gaksenim, who's is a Zen teacher, who's a monk, took these talks and turned it into content, like the compass of Zen. Wanting enlightenment is a big mistake. So, yeah, it's very interesting that these are actually just from Dharma talks.
Solved or
Wish my book was like that.
dissolved in this life. But if we are aware that what we do or what we create is really the gift of the big I, then we will not be attached to it, and we will not create problems for ourselves or for others. And we should forget day by day what we have done. This is true non-attachment, and we should do something new. To do something new, of course, we must know our past, and this is all right. But we should not keep holding on to anything we have done. We should only reflect on it. And we must have some idea of what we should do in the future. The future is the future. The past is the past. Now we should work on something new. This is our attitude and how we should live in this world. This is Danya Prajna Paramita, to give something.
Just see what's going on in the chat. So, Tom, different in the sense that reading is more flexible. I can read parts. Okay, got it. Edith, to hear it is a lot easier to understand. It is for me. Trish, your book is perfect as it is. Good, thank you.
Or to create something for ourselves. So to do something.
That reminds me, I have a couple books to give away. Maybe I'll talk about that after. I have 2 books to give away.
Through and through is to resume our true activity of creation. This is why we sit. If we do not forget this point, everything will be carried on beautifully. But once we forget this point, the world will be filled with confusion. Mistakes in practice.
Ooh, my favorite.
There are several poor ways of practice which you should understand.
The EQ is different on
Usually
voice.
when you practice Zazen, you become very idealistic and you set up an ideal or goal which you strive to attain and fulfill.
I did that.
But as I have often said, this is absurd. When you are idealistic, you have some gaining idea within yourself. By the time you attain your ideal or goal, your gaining idea will create another ideal. So as long as your practice is based on a gaining idea, and you practice Zazen in an idealistic way, you will have no time actually to attain your ideal. Moreover, you will be sacrificing the meat of your practice. Because your attainment is always ahead, you will always be sacrificing yourself now for some ideal in the future. You end up with nothing. This is absurd. It is not adequate practice at all. But even worse than this idealistic attitude is to practice Zazen in competition with someone else.
Oh, yeah.
This is a poor, shabby kind of practice. Our Soto way puts an emphasis on shikantaza, or just sitting. Actually, we do not have any particular name for our practice.
I've seen this in longer retreats you see a lot going on in longer retreats, right? Because you're there for so long. But during these 3-month retreats, you can kind of see this. Like I would often hear that people comparing themselves to others. And usually it was like, oh, I'm not as clear as that person. Look how strong they're sitting and their mind seems clear. But they have no idea what's going on in that person's mind. Because I hear from everybody, right, at the retreat, even the person who's sitting perfectly or looks perfect is going through a lot of difficulty. So, yeah, this gaining idea is interesting. And I just kind of make it very simple, right? Because if we don't get that thing, we're dissatisfied. And again, if we get it, there's no way we can keep it. Happens all the time in our life. We can't even keep this body. Or we get it, but it turns into another want, or we want more, or it's just maybe if it was a little bit different, right? So they're just natural results. It's not to say that gaining idea is bad. In fact, most of us learn from that experience of that grasping, and it becomes a teaching for us. Then we let go. It's like, oh, it's already here. That's interesting.
When we practice Zazen, we just practice it. And whether we find joy in our practice or not, we just do it. Even though we are sleepy and we are tired of practicing Zazen, of repeating the same thing day after day, even so, we continue our practice. Whether or not someone encourages our practice, we just do it. Even when you practice Zazen alone without a teacher, I think you will find some way to tell whether your practice is adequate or not. When you are tired of sitting, or when you're disgusted with your practice, you should recognize this as a warning signal. You become discouraged with your practice when your practice has been idealistic. You have some gaining idea in your practice, and it is not pure enough. It is when you're...
Yeah, and this really helps. Like we say, show up. So you start a daily practice, even if it's 10 minutes a day, and you do it when you want to do it, and you do it when you don't want to do it, right? Because that really helps with their life. Sometimes we don't want to go to work, or sometimes we don't want to have that hard conversation. But if we're just showing up, and this is where great effort comes in, what she talked about, if we just show up and do it, that means we are able to show up in other parts of our lives like that. When we're tired, when we're sad, when we're happy, when we have energy. Tom, regarding no gain, Kodo Sawaki said something like, Zazen is good for nothing. Unless this good for nothing doesn't penetrate every cell for you, it's really good for nothing. Good point.
Your practice is rather greedy that you become discouraged with it. So you should be grateful that you have a sign or warning signal to show you the weak point in your practice. At that time, forgetting all about your mistake and renewing your way, you can resume your original practice. This is a very important point. So as long as you continue your practice, you're quite safe. But as it is very difficult to continue, you must find some way to encourage yourself. As it is hard to encourage yourself without becoming involved in some poor kind of practice, to continue our pure practice by yourself may be rather difficult. This is why we have a teacher.
Sangha.
With your teacher, you will correct your practice. Of course, you will have a very hard time with him. But even so, you will always be safe from wrong practice.
Oh, this is so true.
Most Zen Buddhist priests have had a difficult...
I've heard this too. Kind of interesting. A teacher told me this. I think when I first became a teacher and started leading retreats, he said, let's see, what did he say? If 100% of the people like you, you're doing something wrong. If 100% of people don't like you, you're doing something wrong. But if, 70 to 75% of the people like you and the others don't, then you're probably doing something right. And that just means that, the teaching is very difficult. I mean, we know that sitting meditation, sometimes we see things that are very difficult. But sometimes a teacher reflects that mind back to us and it's not comfortable. But we can either use that to help us let go, or we can attach to it. If we attach to it, then it's like, I don't like this teacher, it's bullshit, I'm going to another one. I wanted to do that many times with my teacher, but I had this effort that he was talking about and the sincerity of just wanting to see things for what they are. So I stuck with him for a while, but he pissed me off many times.
Difficult time with their masters. When they talk about the difficulties, you may think that without this kind of hardship, you cannot practice Zazen, but this is not true. Whether you have difficulties in your practice or not, as long as you continue it, you have pure practice in its true sense. Even when you are not aware of it, you have it. So Dogen Zenji said, do not think you will necessarily be aware of your own enlightenment. Whether or not you are aware of it, you have your own true enlightenment within your practice.
That's really interesting too, right? That our enlightened nature, no one can give to us. Also, no one can take it away.
Mistake will be to practice for the sake of the joy you find in it. Actually, when your practice is involved in a feeling of joy, it is not in very good shape either. Of course, this is not poor practice, but compared to the true practice, it is not so good. In Hinayana Buddhism, practice is classified in 4 ways. The best way is just to do it without having any joy in it, not even spiritual joy. This way is just to do it, forgetting your physical and mental feeling, forgetting all about yourself in your practice. This is the 4th stage, or the highest stage. The next highest stage is to have just physical joy in your practice. At this stage, you find some pleasure in practice, and you will practice because of the pleasure you find in it. In the 2nd stage, you have both mental and physical joy, or good feeling. These 2 middle stages are stages in which you practice Zazen because you feel good in your practice. The 1st stage is when you have no thinking and no curiosity in your practice. These 4 stages also apply to our Mahayana practice, and the highest is just to practice it. If you find some difficulty in your practice, that is the warning that you have some wrong idea, so you have to be careful.
Which can be a good teaching for us, right? We can see sometimes we have a gaining idea, but we don't really see it clearly. But we can see it from the result, and we can see it from just paying attention to it, right? Then we can just let it go. Then it's like, oh, wow, it's actually quite simple.
But do not give up your practice. Continue it knowing your weakness. Here there is no gaining idea. Here there is no fixed idea of attainment. You do not say, this is enlightenment, or that is not right practice. Even in wrong practice, when you realize it and continue, there is right practice. Our practice cannot be perfect, but without being discouraged by this, we should continue it. This is the secret of practice.
Not only practice, we're not perfect.
And if you want to find some encouragement in your discouragement, getting tired of practice is itself the encouragement. You encourage yourself when you get tired of it. When you do not want to do it, that is the warning signal. It is like having a toothache when your teeth are not so good. When you feel some pain in your teeth, you go to a dentist. That is our way. The cause of conflict is some fixed idea or one-sided idea. When everyone knows the value of pure practice, we will have little conflict in our world. This is the secret of our practice and Dogen Zenji's way. Dogen repeats this point in his book, Shobogenzo, The Treasury of the True Dharma. If you understand the cause of conflict as some fixed or one-sided idea, you can find meaning in various practices without being caught by any of them. If you do not realize this point, you will be easily caught by some particular way, and you will say, this is enlightenment. This is perfect practice. This is our way. The rest of the ways are not perfect. This is the best way. This is a big mistake. There is no particular way.
I talk about this in my last video on Friday. When people think their way is correct, it happens in every religion, family arguments, political arguments.
True practice. You should find your own way, and you should know what kind of practice you have right now. Knowing both the advantages and disadvantages of some special practice, you can practice that special way without danger. But if you have a one-sided attitude, you will ignore the disadvantage of the practice, emphasizing only its good part. Eventually, you will discover the worst side of the practice and become discouraged when it is too late. This is silly. We should be grateful that the ancient teachers point out this mistake. Limiting your activity. In our practice, we have no particular purpose or goal, nor any special object of worship. In this respect, our practice is somewhat different from the usual religious practices. Joshu, a great Chinese Zen master, said, a clay Buddha cannot cross water. A bronze Buddha cannot get through a furnace. A wooden Buddha cannot get through a fire. Whatever it is, if your practice is directed towards some particular object, such as a clay, a bronze, or a wooden Buddha, it will not always work. So as long as you have some particular goal in your practice, that practice will not help you completely. It may help you as long as you're directed toward that goal, but when you resume your everyday life, it will not work. You may think that if there's no purpose or no goal in our practice, we will not know what to do. But there is a way. The way to practice without having any goal is to limit your activity or to be concentrated on what you are doing in this moment. Instead of having some
We're always saying that, right? What am I doing right now?
particular object in mind, you should limit your activity. When your mind is wandering about elsewhere, you have no chance to express yourself. But if you limit your activity to what you can do just now, in this moment, then you can express fully your true nature.
Yeah. Some in a school I teach in has this teaching too. If you make this moment clear, that means if you make what you're doing clear in this moment, then your whole life is clear. But if we're not clear about what we're doing in this moment, our whole life is not clear.
Which is the universal Buddha nature. This is our way. When we practice Zazen, we limit our activity to the smallest extent. Just keeping the right posture and being concentrated on sitting is how we express the universal nature. Then we become Buddha, and we express Buddha nature.
You are Buddha.
So instead of having some object of worship, we just concentrate on the activity which we do in each moment. When you bow, you should just bow. When you sit, you should just sit. When you eat, you should just eat. If you do this, the universal nature is there. In Japanese, we call it Ichigyo Zammai, or one-act samadhi. Sammai, or samadhi, is concentration. Ichigyo is one practice. I think some of you who practice Zazen here may believe in some other religion.
I'm not sure if it's either, John. If we use the example, if you perceive the truth of someone's hunger, then what? That's all.
But I do not mind. Our practice has nothing to do with some particular religious belief. And for you, there is no need to hesitate to practice our way, because it has nothing to do with Christianity or Shintoism or Hinduism. Our practice is for everyone. Usually when someone believes in a particular religion, his attitude becomes more and more a sharp angle, pointing away from himself. But our way is not like this. In our way, the point of the sharp angle is always toward ourselves, not away from ourselves. So there is no need to worry about the difference between Buddhism and the religion you may believe in.
Yeah. But you can attach to Buddhism and Zen. We already know that part. I think I wrote this in my book. Can't remember. Still haven't read it yet. About the man I met who was a Christian in the grocery store, who kind of yelled at me, "Do you believe in Jesus Christ?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And he goes, "I didn't think Buddhist monks," I was a monk at the time, "I didn't think Buddhist monks believed in Jesus." I said, "Well, I don't practice Buddhism." so like more confused, but you could tell like his anger went down, because then he was like curious. So he goes, "What do you practice?" So I was trying to give examples, just the way I kind of teach about Zen, but I knew I wasn't really sinking in. Like he looked confused. The more I said, the more he was confused. So then I just finally said, "All right, so if someone is hungry, what can you do?" And he said, "Feed them." And I said, "Is that Christianity or is it Buddhism?" And then you can see like something really hit him, and his anger completely disappeared. In fact, he asked me after that, "Do you ever get angry?" And then he started talking about his mom and the difficult relationship they have and all these kinds of things. It's really interesting to see, if we take a step back and see that the religions and practices are pointing to something, and we actually have our own experience of the practice we do, then that can help in different situations, even if somebody's holding on to theirs. Okay, Trish, it is in the book. Yeah, I don't know how much. The publisher had a limit on the answers to the questions, a word limit, so I couldn't put like everything in there. I'll have to look through it, but
Joshu's statement about the different Buddhas concerns those who direct their practice toward some particular Buddha. One kind of Buddha will not serve your purpose completely. You will have to throw it away sometime, or at least ignore it. But if you understand the secret of our practice, wherever you go, you yourself are boss. No matter what the situation, you cannot neglect Buddha because you yourself are Buddha. Only this Buddha will help you completely.
It's in the blog. Okay.
Study yourself. The purpose of studying Buddhism is not to study Buddhism, but to study ourselves.
He's going to.
It is impossible
quote
to study
Dogen,
ourselves without some teaching.
I'm sure he's going to quote Dogen.
If you want to know what water is, you need science, and the scientist needs a laboratory. In the laboratory, there are various ways in which to study what water is. Thus, it is possible to know what kind of elements water has, the various forms it takes, and its nature. But it is impossible thereby to know water in itself. It is the same thing with us. We need some teaching, but just by studying the teaching alone, it is impossible to know what I in myself am. Through the teaching, we may understand our human nature, but the teaching is not we ourselves. It is some explanation of ourselves. So if you are attached to the teaching or to the teacher, that is a big mistake.
Yes.
The moment you meet a teacher, you should leave the teacher and you should be independent.
I agree.
You need a teacher so that you can become independent. If you are not attached to him, the teacher will show you.
Or her. You can tell this was recorded, in the 70s?
The way to yourself. You have a teacher for yourself, not for the teacher. Rinzai, an early Chinese Zen master, analyzed how to teach his disciples in 4 ways. Sometimes he talked about the disciple himself. Sometimes he talked about the teaching itself. Sometimes he gave an interpretation of the disciple or the teaching. And finally, sometimes he did not give any instruction at all to his disciples. He knew that even without being given any instruction, a student is a student. Strictly speaking, there is no need to teach the student because the student himself is Buddha, even though he may not be aware of it. And even though he is aware of his true nature, if he is attached to this awareness, that is already wrong. When he is not aware of it, he has everything. But when he becomes aware of it...
I'm not sure how long this goes when part 2 ends, but I say, another 10 minutes? I think we've been here for a while. The stream says an hour and 17 minutes. So let's do another 10 minutes.
He thinks that what he is aware of is himself, which is a big mistake. When you do not hear anything from the teacher, but just sit, this is called teaching without teaching. But sometimes this is not sufficient. So we listen to lecture.
I've seen this too, Cesare. It's sad. It happens too. Even Zen Master Sung Song found it difficult. Like he loved when the students would become independent, especially in the interview. Like they were asking him koans, and sometimes he couldn't respond clearly, right? But he didn't think, oh, I'm a bad teacher. He thought, wow, the student's growing. This is amazing. Or real, believing in themselves. I guess that's a better way of saying it. But there were still people who followed him around. In fact, when he lived in the Providence Zen Center, there must have been, I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard it could be 30 to 40 people living there. And then when he moved out, then many of those people left too. So it's just what happens. So hopefully the teacher can see this and help them. So Trish, beware of the teacher that encouraged such attachment. Definitely. Or if they're claiming something too, right? Or promising something. All of that stuff.
And have discussions. But we should remember that the purpose of practice in a particular place is to study ourselves. To be independent, we study. Like the scientist, we have to have some means by which to study. We need a teacher because it is impossible to study ourselves by ourselves. But you should not make a mistake. You should not take what you have learned with a teacher for you yourself. The study you make with your teacher is a part of your everyday life, a part of your incessant activity. In this sense, there is no difference between the practice and the activity you have in everyday life. So to find the meaning of your life in the Zendo is to find the meaning of your everyday activity. To be aware of the meaning of your life, you practice Zazen.
Good point, Cesare.
When I was at a Heiji monastery in Japan, everyone was just doing what he should do. That is all. It is the same as waking up in the morning. We have to get up. At a Heiji monastery, when we had to sit, we sat. When we had to bow to Buddha, we bowed to Buddha. That is all.
Yep.
And when we were practicing, we did not feel anything special. We did not even feel that we were leading a monastic life. For us, the monastic life...
I could totally relate to that, especially sitting 3-month retreats. It's like everyday life. It's nothing special. It's like going into the meditation hall was like going in the bathroom, right? You're just doing your job at that moment.
It was the usual life. And people who came from the city were unusual people. When we saw them, we felt, oh, some unusual people have come. But once I had left the Heiji and been away for some time, coming back was different. I heard the various sounds of practice, the bells and the monks reciting the sutra, and I had a deep feeling. There were tears flowing out of my eyes, nose, and mouth. It is the people who are outside of the monastery who feel its atmosphere. Those who are practicing actually do not feel anything. I think this is true for everything. When we hear the sound of the pine trees on a windy day, perhaps the wind is just blowing and the pine tree is just standing in the wind. That is all that they are doing. But the people who listen to the wind in the tree will write a poem or will feel something unusual. That is, I think, the way everything is. So to feel something about Buddhism is not the main point. Whether that feeling is good or bad is out of the question. We do not mind whatever it is. Buddhism is not good or bad. We are doing what we should do. That is Buddhism. Of course, some encouragement is necessary, but that encouragement is just encouragement. It is not the true purpose of practice. It is just medicine. When we become discouraged, we want some medicine. When we're in good spirits, we don't need any medicine. You should not mistake medicine for food. Sometimes medicine is necessary, but it should not become our food. So of Rinzai's 4 ways of practice, the perfect one is not to give a student any interpretation of himself, nor to give him any encouragement. If we think of ourselves as our bodies, the teaching then may be our clothing. Sometimes we talk about our clothing. Sometimes we talk about our body. But neither body nor clothing is actually we ourselves. We ourselves are the big activity. We are just expressing the smallest particle of the big activity, that is all. So it is all right to talk about ourselves, but actually there is no need to do so. Before we open our mouths, we are already expressing the big existence, including ourselves. So the purpose of talking about ourselves is to correct the misunderstanding we have when we are attached to any particular temporal form or color of the big activity. It is necessary to talk about what our body is and what our activity is so that we may not make any mistake about them. So to talk about ourselves is actually to forget about ourselves. Dogen Zenji said, to study Buddhism is to study ourselves. To study ourselves is to forget ourselves. When you become attached to a temporal expression.
So I use this as a koan, right? Just to see what does that actually mean? Yeah, to study the self or to study the Buddha way is to study the self. But in order to study the self, we must let go of the self. So how do we actually do that?
Of your true nature. It is necessary to talk about Buddhism, or else you will think the temporal expression is it. But this particular expression of it is not it. And yet at the same time, it is it.
That's
For
a good
a while,
distinction.
this is it. For the smallest particle of time, this is it. But it is not always so. The very next instant, it is not so. And thus, this is not it. So that you will realize this fact, it's necessary to study Buddhism. But the purpose of studying Buddhism is to study ourselves and to forget ourselves. When we forget ourselves, we actually are the true activity of the big existence, or reality itself. When we realize this fact, there's no problem whatsoever in this world, and we can enjoy our life without feeling any difficulties. The purpose of our practice is to be aware of this fact. To polish a tile.
Let's listen to this story. I think this is a good story.
Zen stories or koans are very difficult to understand before you know what we are doing moment after moment. But if you know exactly what we are doing in each moment, you will not find koans so difficult. There are so many koans.
I always say koans are life.
I often talk to you about a frog, and each time everybody laughs. But a frog is very interesting. He sits like us too, you know. But he does not think that he's doing anything so special. When you go to a zendo and sit, you may think you are doing some special thing. While your husband or wife is sleeping, you are practicing zazen. You are doing some special thing and your spouse is lazy. That may be your understanding of zazen. But look at the frog. A frog also sits like us, but he has no idea of zazen. Watch him. If something annoys him, he will make a face. If something comes along to eat, he will snap it up and eat. And he eats sitting. Actually, that is our zazen, not any special thing. Here's a kind of frog koan for you. Baso was a famous Zen master called the Horse Master. He was the disciple of Nangaku, one of the 6th patriarch's disciples. One day while he was studying under Nangaku, Baso was sitting practicing zazen. He was a man of large physical build. When he talked, his tongue reached to his nose. His voice was loud and his zazen must have been very good. Nangaku saw him sitting like a great mountain or like a frog. Nangaku asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm practicing zazen," Baso replied. "Why are you practicing zazen?" "I want to attain enlightenment. I want to be a Buddha," the disciple said. Do you know what the teacher did? He picked up a tile and he started to polish it. In Japan, after taking a tile from the kiln, we polish it to give it a beautiful finish. So Nangaku picked up a tile and started to polish it. Baso, his disciple, asked, "What are you doing?" "I want to make this tile into a jewel," Nangaku said. "How is it possible to make a tile a jewel?" Baso asked. "How is it possible to become a Buddha by practicing zazen?" Nangaku replied.
Oh.
Do you want to attain Buddhahood? There is no Buddhahood beside your ordinary mind. When a cart does not go, which do you whip, the cart or the horse? The master asked. Nangaku's meaning here is that whatever you do, that is zazen.
Yeah.
True zazen is beyond being in bed or sitting in the zendo. If your husband or wife is in bed, that is zazen. If you think I'm sitting here and my spouse is in bed, then even though you are sitting here in the cross-legged position, that is not true zazen. You should be like a frog always. That is true zazen. Dogen Zenji commented on this koan. He said, when the horse master becomes the horse master, Zen becomes Zen. When Baso becomes Baso, his zazen becomes true zazen and Zen becomes Zen. What is true zazen? When you become you. When you are you, then no matter what you do, that is zazen. Even though you are in bed, you may not be you most of the time. Even though you are sitting in the zendo, I wonder whether you are you in the true sense. Here's another famous koan. Zuikan was a Zen master who always used to address himself.
Oh, I know this one.
Zuikan, he would call, and then he would answer, "Yes? Zuikan? Yes." Of course, he was living all alone in his small zendo, and of course he knew who he was. But sometimes he lost himself. And whenever he lost himself, he would address himself. "Zuikan? Yes?" If we are like a frog, we are always ourselves. But even a frog sometimes loses himself and he makes a sour face. And if something comes along, he will snap at it and eat it. So I think a frog is always addressing himself. I think you should do that also. Even in Zazen, you will lose yourself. When you become sleepy or when your mind starts to wander about, you lose yourself. When your legs become painful, why are my legs so painful? You lose yourself. Because you lose yourself, your problem will be a problem for you. If you do not lose yourself, then even though you have difficulty, there's actually no problem whatsoever. You just sit in the midst of the problem. When you are a part of the problem, or when the problem is a part of you, there is no problem, because you are the problem itself. The problem is you, yourself. If this is so, there's no problem. When your life is always a part of your surroundings.
All right, we're going to take a pause. But very interesting stories. We actually use that koan in Korean. It's Zen Master Songnyeom used to call himself and answer himself. So our school, we have these things called homework. So traditionally, there's like 1,700 koans in the Japanese, Korean, Chinese tradition. And Zen Master Sung chose 12 that represented the whole 1,700, right? Because a lot of them repeat themselves. It's like different ways of saying the same question, different ways of asking. But it's a very interesting one about this master, right? He used to call himself master. Yes. Do not be deceived by anybody, any place, anytime. Yes, yes, yes. So he was always calling himself and answering himself. So we ask, he called himself, answered himself, two minds. So which one of those is the correct master? And really, this points down to everything that Suzuki Roshi has been pointing to. When you're doing something, do it 100%, right? So if we're sitting and we're just sitting, that's called sitting meditation, or he would say zazen. If we're driving a car and doing it 100%, we call that driving meditation, or you can say driving zazen or driving zen, right? So when you're walking, eating, all of it. So the koan practice really helps us to do these things from moment to moment. So interesting question. And the first one, the other story he said before that, I've heard the story like he said, I'm trying to make a mirror out of this tile. And that just kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier about grasping after something. If we just let go, then we can see our original Buddha nature right now in this moment. But if we're trying to do something to get that, right, then we're miles away. It's like trying to catch the smoke of incense. Not possible. All right, I want to pause there. I have no idea where part 2 ends. I'm guessing it's around there. And is there another part? I have no idea. I'm guessing there's one more part after this. I don't know if anyone has heard this before, but we'll stop there and we'll continue this maybe in 2 weeks, if that's all okay with you. Let's see. I'll probably maybe in tomorrow's video, I will give away a couple books. So as you know, we had a giveaway for our Patreon. Once we got to 20 people on our Patreon, then I was going to give away a book to somebody randomly. Also, there's somebody here. I don't know if I can name you your name, but she doesn't want her free copy of the book. So I'm also going to give that way to somebody who wants it. So maybe I'll put that in a video tomorrow and have, well, I'll work it out. I'm not sure how to do it, but I'm going to give away 2 books. I'll sign it for you. Trish, 3 parts. Okay, good. I think we're getting close. But yeah, thank you. This is really good. It's really, again, I've said this before, it's really interesting to hear the teachings being expressed in a different way, right? As you can see too, you follow my channel, I have my own way of expressing this, but again, they're just pointing to something, and that something is before these words. So thank you, everyone. It's good to see you, Tom. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful day. Good evening. Trixie, you're welcome. Thank you so much for being here and joining and participating. I will have, this will be recorded. In fact, it is recording right now. I'll have access to that on my website. So if you missed the first one, you can check that out. It's in, I think I put it in a playlist called Listening Party. You'll find it there. And this one will be in there too. So thank you, everyone. It's really wonderful to see you all. I got to get back to my kids. See you, Tommy, Tamar, Adam, Raul, Phineas. Good together practice. Yes. Will, good to see you. Frog, right? Magdalena, John, great to see you all. Thank you again. Oh, Tobias, take care. I'll see some of you tomorrow, right? I'm giving interviews for the Quantum Online Sangha. So I will see you there. If not, oh, what else? I'm doing the Tuesday morning live stream practice. So I found an easy way to find these live streams. If you just go to YouTube/Jason Quinn /live. Anyways, it's on there too on my video playlists. But I do every Tuesday morning. I'm doing a practice at 5:15 a.m. Pacific time. So if you're around, please join us. Okay? See you, everybody. Have a clear day.